What's going on, everyone? It's Justin here, and today I've got a phone that a lot of people have been talking about, and that is the Pocophone F1. So originally I thought it was just another Chinese phone that was budget and had some nice specs and stuff like that, but as more people started to talk about it, I started to get a lot of requests, so I went on eBay and bought one for myself to give you an honest review on what exactly I think of this phone. And also, most importantly, another question a lot of people have been asking, whether or not it is better than the OnePlus 6 in terms of a value standpoint. For those who don't know, the OnePlus 6 is currently my favorite Android phone overall, despite it not having the best camera out there, but everything else about the hardware, the software, the display, and the full experience is my pick for an Android device. With this phone having a starting price point around the $300 range, I think it is going to be a very compelling option out there, but of course, right off the bat, you could tell that they have cut some corners in some places in order to meet that price point. The OnePlus 6, of course, does still come in at a higher price, but for a flagship spec smartphone and its hardware, it is probably one of the best values out there. So it's definitely a question that I want to answer for myself, so here is my experience with the Pocophone F1. I would also really like it if you guys went and left a comment down below as to what your most important feature of a smartphone is, because a lot of times manufacturers do watch these YouTube videos and learn from consumers as to what they like. Of course, if you guys are excited for some of the upcoming smartphone coverage for the fall season, including the iPhone XS, the iPhone XS Max, the iPhone XR, the Pixel 3, as well as the LG V40, make sure you subscribe to the channel as I'm probably going to be giving away an iPhone XS. And also follow me over on my social media, including Instagram and Twitter, where I kind of post my first live look at the devices when they first arrive before you guys see the full video. If you guys would also like to learn some more information about the Pocophone F1 or any of the products I feature in my videos, make sure you go ahead and check out unbox.tv, where they kind of bring together all the products featured in videos of your favorite tech YouTubers out there and brings it all to one place where you get to learn more and also access retailers such as Best Buy, Amazon, and B&H if you want to purchase the product. I think it's got a nice visually appealing experience. If you guys want to go ahead and check that out as well as my profile, I'm going to leave a link to that down below, and I'd like to thank them for sponsoring this video. So begin with the specs. I think one of the biggest things that people are going to talk about as soon as they see the Pocophone F1 is what's inside. You've got a Snapdragon 845 processor with 6 gigs of RAM, a large display with a notch on it that doesn't come at any additional cost, and the overall hardware approach to the phone is just very simple, but it has everything that you're going to need. You've got stereo speakers that actually do sound pretty good, as well as a 3.5mm headphone jack on the top. And I think something that we have noticed with a lot of budget manufacturers out there is that they've tried to stay on the consumer side by including the headphone jack instead of removing it like we see on a lot of flagship phones. Which might seem a little bit ironic because if you're paying more, you're expecting to have more features as opposed to less, even if it's something that you don't really think you're ever going to use. I think it's just really interesting to see where brands have prioritized the spending to produce a device, whether it's spending it on the processor, the camera, the hardware, and sensors, IP ratings, and stuff like that. With all the nice specs on the Pocophone F1, it also stays nice and cool with liquid cooling, but when it comes to overall hardware, they've kept things very, very simple. You notice on the back, there's just a very simple plastic finish that isn't anything interesting, at least at the base model. There is also a Kevlar model as well. But this one right here comes in a few different colors, and I think plastic is something that you just love or hate. One good thing about it is that if you drop it, your phone is probably going to be okay, but it just doesn't give you that premium feel that you get when you're picking up a nice aluminum smartphone every day in the morning. The device comes in at 8mm in thickness, and it actually feels very thin because of how tapered it is. The plastic makes it feel nice and light as it weighs in at under 200 grams. And on the bottom, you're going to find a USB Type-C port for charging and syncing. There's good news and bad news when it comes to charging, as there isn't wireless charging, which is completely okay, as I haven't seen that on any budget phone, including the OnePlus 6, but there is fast charging compatibility with that 4000 mAh battery inside. The fingerprint sensor on the back works smoothly. You also have the option to use Face Unlock on the front as well. But on the hardware standpoint, one thing you won't find is any sort of IP water resistant rating. When it comes to the display, you have a really nice 6.18-inch 2246 by 1080 display that is IPS LCD, so nothing too crazy there in terms of the panel type, but I will say the screen is actually very good in quality. The colors are great, they're very vibrant. You do have a few different settings when it comes to contrast and the white balance. But one thing you will notice is that it isn't the brightest screen out there, but when it comes to viewing angles and just general viewing experience, it's really good. One thing that you might also notice that is a little bit different here for a budget device is the fact that it has a notch. So typically, you might see a budget smartphone have a screen that might go almost edge to edge, but in this case, you do have a notch on the top that is pretty much the same size as the one on the iPhone X, and you do have a small chin on the bottom. I think it's pretty obvious now that the notch is so contagious that it even makes it to budget devices, and honestly, after using the iPhone X for about a year now, I think it's something I'm pretty used to. It's something you're going to continue to see except with Samsung devices, and I think people just need to stop complaining about it. When it comes to software and performance, this device definitely lives up to its expectations. The Snapdragon Snapdragon 845 processor with 6 gigs of RAM, it really does run like a smartphone should as a flagship. I think as much as hardware is important, software optimization is a huge factor, and from my experiences using this device, there wasn't any issues in terms of lag, hiccups, and stuff crashing. The EMUI does look very clean and simple, but it definitely isn't my favorite out there. I'm still a stock Android guy, but I think it's definitely something that I don't really have any major complaints about. But I think the software experience on the X1 is really good, and the way the phone performs is as it should. The camera that you're going to find on this phone is a 12 megapixel sensor with an f1.9 aperture, and the secondary camera is 5 megapixel and mainly used for depth and portrait mode. When it comes to the photos, it was actually better than I expected, but nothing impressive. It was a good camera, it took some solid photos, especially in good daylight, obviously. The colors do lean a little bit more to the cool side, but the photos were sharp, and for a smartphone of this price, it definitely exceeded my expectations, but also don't get your hopes up. I also found the autofocus to be very fast on this phone, and when it comes to the front-facing camera, it was good, but once again, nothing crazy. You also have the option to record 4K UHD video, but one thing that you will notice with the smartphone is that there isn't any optical image stabilization, which I'm not really going to complain about here, because obviously with a smartphone of this price point, you just can't expect some of the additional things that you find on flagships. But one thing that I feel like could have been maybe a better compromise is instead of having the secondary camera for portrait mode, perhaps add stabilization to the main camera or just a better single main camera that they focus on. As for the battery life, you've got a 4,000 milliamp hour battery, and I was able to get easily through an entire day and even a bit into the second day with this phone. I think that's overall very nice to see, because on my main iPhone, where I paid like $1,500 or $1,600 for it, I'm getting like less than half a day of battery life, and 4,000 milliamp hours seems to be like the gold standard for Android phones at the moment. Quick charging tops it off nicely, but you don't have any wireless charging, which I think is completely fine. So on the battery standpoint, despite the high specs and everything, it did live up to my expectations. Another area that you often find manufacturers cutting corners on is speakers, and this phone didn't do that. It has a stereo setup with a front-facing speaker, and the sound quality is actually pretty good, so here's a quick sound test. I think now that we've realized that the Pocophone is actually a really good phone for its value, it's got a decent camera, it's got great battery life, great specs, a nice display, and really the corners that were cut don't really matter to a lot of people out there if you're looking for a budget smartphone. The big question is whether or not this is better than the OnePlus 6. Obviously from a hardware standpoint, the OnePlus 6 right off the bat completely kicks the ass of the Pocophone F1. You've got a phone that has a glass back, that has a couple different color options as well. It's got metal sides. The front also has smaller bezels overall, and the phone is also kind of water resistant, and it just feels more refined and premium on the little details. The camera is also better on the OnePlus 6, and I will say that I do like the display a bit more because of the size. The notch is also smaller, and it also has a brighter screen than the Pocophone F1. But a lot of things that these phones have in common is the fact that obviously they both have the notch, but they also have the best specs available on the market at the moment, which is Snapdragon 845 with 6 gigs of RAM and up to 8 gigs on the OnePlus 6. They both have great battery life, and in what they set out to do, I think they've definitely achieved what they had to. In my opinion, I kind of look at it this way. The Pocophone F1 is, in its class as a budget smartphone, the best offering that I've tried out to date. I wouldn't really call it a flagship killer by any means, but the OnePlus 6 on the other hand is a phone that comes in at the bridge price point of a budget phone and a flagship phone such as the Samsung Galaxy S9s. And I think in that class, it definitely makes itself its most compelling option. Personally, I think the OnePlus 6 is worth every cent, and it is still my favorite pick for an Android smartphone, but the Pocophone F1 is something that you're not gonna be disappointed with if you go ahead and purchase it. Otherwise, if you guys enjoyed a video like this, make sure you drop a like and a comment down below as to what you think of the Pocophone F1, and I'll see you all in the next video.